All right, we are live. Welcome everybody to the LaraChat Live, episode 34. Today we're going to be talking about API nightmares and development. It's a pretty thin staff today. It's just me and TJ Miller managing the managing the console. So we'll see how well this goes. Sean should be joining us a little bit, and a few other people may or may not drop in. We'll see how that works out for us.
He's stuck
TJ.
He's stuck on Canada time.
How's it going, buddy?
Good, dude. Good.
These Canadians, man, you can never count on the Canadians.
Man, and where's Maddie?
I'm telling you.
I think we scared him off last
Matt, week. We got everybody. Everybody bailed on us today. So what have you been up to, my friend?
Oh, dude. Lots. Hiring, which is, we had a great conversation last week about it. So that was helpful in kind of getting some hiring stuff done this week. I'm doing a lot of project specs and, doing just like some feature updates to an API. How about you, dude?
Yes. Just plugging along. The end of the year is coming up. We're getting super excited about Wave PHP next year. So we got a lot of things we're wrapping up before we start doing our big push for call for papers and getting speakers lined up. So I got a lot of stuff we're wrapping up within our business. See, here's the problem. We're recording this before I record PHP Ugly. I've got some exciting news about my company, but I can't. I feel like I need to hold on to it. But we've got like a lot of exciting things happening on it. We're going to talk about it tonight on PHP Ugly. So if anybody's interested, feel free to listen in. But yes, so much fun stuff going on. So much exciting stuff. I can't believe I was sitting back thinking about it. We've had our little business going for a few years now, and it's like the second year of like a real official like company run sort of scenario where we've had a lot of people working with us, and we've felt it prudent to like hold end of the year sort of dinners and buy clients like gifts. And this is like the second year we're doing that. It's like, wow, man, this has been such a great ride. It might not last forever, and if it all goes away within the next couple of months, I'll be disappointed to see it go. But man, it's been such a great ride. I love the fact that I've been able to make a living, as well as allow a lot of my friends to make a living off of development and PHP and Laravel. It's just been such a wonderful thing to be able to do.
Yeah, it's so cool, man. That's like that's got to just be like so rewarding, man. That's awesome. Congratulations.
Thank you. So we are going to talk APIs. What are your feelings on APIs? You a fan of APIs?
Oh yeah, man. You know it. Like I'm I don't know. I'm trying to position myself as like an API guy. No, I do. I'd say probably the last 2 years has been 90% APIs for me. At our Detroit Laravel meetup 2 days ago, I was doing like CRUD basics, and we were, driving out like building like a little blogging platform, and like I'm live coding it. I'm like, all right, let's drop in and like do some Blade. I forgot how to do so much Blade because I've just been doing APIs for so long now. It's I forgot how Blade works. I'm just making a mess of the like, don't remember any bootstrap classes anymore. That's so sad.
Me. Like the simplest things. Like I just want to change my button color. What was that command again?
Yeah.
I tell you, if you consider yourself a backend developer, you are definitely an API person, man. That's just the way it goes. I am so in love with doing API development. It's so quick. You feel like you get so much accomplished in such a short amount of time without having to worry about that whole front end UI interface.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I spend just as much time worrying about like the developer experience of our API that, man, doing that front end, I spend almost the same amount of time, and I take the same amount of care as I would into like a graphical user interface as much as I do like an API interface. Like I toil over that stuff, and that kind of, prevents some of these horror stories that you hear about with with consuming it. And there's, I mean, I can definitely think of horror stories on either side, like the consumption of an API and, you know, walking into something that was developed, or, you know, even just like the, you know, some of the struggle of like, yeah, going through that painstaking design process, but you know, it pays off. How about you? You got any big API horror stories that stick out?
Uh, you know, just from the world, mainly from trying to consume other companies' APIs, especially like the older ones that before there was really a good standard for APIs. Like, like me, when I say API, I'm thinking JSON responses. Like I'm no longer in like an XML sort of world or anything else. If I'm calling for an API endpoint, I'm completely expecting a JSON response. And when I don't get that, I'm like, you know, I'm like, God, this sucks.
Yeah. So I work for a company called International Band Card, and we do payment processing. So I get to deal with all the old school SOAP and XML and XML validation and uh, all sorts of fun, just gnarly stuff that it's the banking industry. They don't change fast, they don't change often, and you know, they're all still running the same tech that they've been running for a long time.
Yeah, the financial institutions. Yeah, whenever you're working, and we do that a lot with one of our clients, where we have to work with a lot of financial backends, and it's almost always XML. You know, it's never a nice clean JSON response. Yeah, that's why you really love when they start to embrace some of the new platforms, new services like Stripe. You can tell these were services that were written by developers for developers. They knew what they wanted, and I think those are probably some of the best examples of API endpoints that I've ever come across. What about you? Do you have any API endpoints that you're like, oh yeah, these are done right?
Yeah, I like Stripes a lot. You know, I think paired with their documentation, like they really changed the way that people document APIs. Like their API documentation has always been beautiful. It's always been interactive, really easy to use. And I think they just do like a really good job. Like that blog post that they published recently about how they do their API versioning. I think that's amazing. Like I couldn't, you know, that's probably the one that sticks out to me the most. You know, I'm in the middle of replatforming our entire payment system so that we can have, like, right now it's XML and it's all SOAP, and I'm in the middle of replatforming it all into like a really nice usable JSON API. It's, you know, it takes a lot of work, but it's well worth it, you know.
So we've got a few things we can touch on as far as API development. I guess let me kick a couple questions off you, and let me just get kind of a response from you. First, I guess the first one is, what do you think is the most common mistake when people are creating APIs to be consumed? What's the most common mistake that you think developers make?
I think probably the most prevalent mistake is either like I think it really pertains to documentation. Like I think that's a really hard point. And not just like documentation of how to consume the API, but I'm talking about like more internal documentation, and you know, not, you know, by having like internal documentation of whether you like adopt a, you know, an existing standard or you have your own standard. It's like having that documentation to be able to adhere to a standard to be consistent. So it's kind of like that sets the, I think, the foundation for how the rest of the API is going to be built.
Look, the Canadian wanders in late. Sean.
Holy smokes.
I'd say I'm sorry, but that's such a Canadian thing to do.
Yeah, TJ and I are just kicking it off, kind of getting into the conversation around APIs and some of the bigger mistakes that you see developers do. How are you doing?
I'm not bad. Happy I finally made it. Just one of those meetings that you couldn't avoid. Work is work. But I'm so excited to be here. Let's trash some APIs.
Yeah, TJ, I'm totally on board. I mean, and I'm just as guilty of it. You know, good documentation when you're dealing with APIs, and there's the specific goal of, hey, this is just an endpoint to be consumed. Documentation has got to be on point, and I'm probably just as guilty as anybody else is not doing a great job at that.
Yeah, I think the way that I look at APIs, and we talked a little bit about this in the API Life episode too, is an API is a contract. You're defining a contract for a long time because other people are, coding to that contract. You've got, a front end, you've got mobile apps, you've got like a website. All of these different things are consuming it. And if you break it, you break all their stuff. So having, good documentation on your standard as you're from a developer perspective helps you develop a consistent and, firm contract and be able to hold it for a long time.
So your favorite tool for documentation? I kind of know the answer. We've had this conversation. I feel like I've had this talk with you before.
Yeah. So right now I really like Apiary. It's a great platform, and I like it because you get so much out of the box with it. You get like mock API, you get, automatic GitHub integration. There's a lot to like about it, all packed in one. But that's not to say you can't do that with other tools. The main standard that Apiary was built around is called API Blueprint, and there's a whole suite of open source tools available for that standard. So at that documentation spec, you can do everything that Apiary does, but they have it all packaged in one nice place.
And like you said, the endpoints that they let you mock out is so valuable when you're developing APIs, because if you haven't ever developed an API before, again, you're developing something that's typically being consumed by something else, a mobile device or another website. So one of the features that Apiary offers is you can make the endpoint all through the documentation without actually doing one line of code, and it will create these mock servers that will give you a response to these endpoints that then your other developers then can go and start building their applications to consume. And it just makes the development process, so you're no longer a bottleneck in the development workflow, and people aren't waiting on you to finish your API development before they can start to develop their piece. So yeah, I agree with you. That's one of the best services out there.
I look at it, workflow wise, using Apiary, or really any of the specs, like using Open API, or you just pick a documentation spec. Open API, Swagger, it's like the next evolution of that. So you pick a documentation spec, and once you do that, you can, the front end can develop to that mock API. And then from the API development side, you can also develop right to that spec. And then you can use a platform, a project called Dread, to actually test that documentation against your implementation. So if you through CI, it's running to build your, next release, it'll actually check your documentation and say, hey, this spec no longer matches your documentation. You need to fix one of them. It's really cool stuff. I don't, Apiary is cool. I don't really care as long as you pick one.
Yeah, and stick with it, right? Yeah.
One of the ones I've used in the past is the same one that Laravel uses for their API documentation. Friend, the PHP SAMI, SAMI. It's not the same as Apiary in terms of the way you can, show output of the API. This one actually just takes your doc block, when you look at the classes and so forth. I like that one a lot. I've never...
What's it called again?
SAMI, SAMI. It's on GitHub. One of the things, I tried to get into Apiary. Maybe it's me. I struggled with it because it felt like I had to learn a whole new way of setting my stuff up to make it work. Maybe it's the way I set up my documentation. I'm not sure.
Yeah,
I'm with you. I struggled with it at first as well. Sorry, TJ.
Oh no, it's fine. It's a spec. Like it, when I first started writing, I first started documenting with Swagger. Yeah, it was like a little hurdle kind of getting into it, and making sure everything works and everything hooks up right. And then give it a little time, and you'll adapt. It's like kind of jumping into a different programming language. Like you can pick it up. You might stumble a little bit though.
So let me ask you guys this. Obviously, we're all Laravel developers, and kind of Laravel's our go-to platform. But Taylor, years ago, released Lumen specifically for, well, I felt specifically for these like API endpoint sort of tasks. Do either one of you guys use Lumen?
I don't. I tried. And I found that I was lacking things. I was so used to doing things and expecting certain things in the Laravel world. Like what was that at the time? I think I couldn't do events or queue jobs or something like that. And I really felt like that should have been a part of it. And keep in mind, this was like right when Lumen came out when I tried it, and it was just, well, I want to be able to save something and then fire off an event to the queue, but I couldn't. I'm not sure if that has changed since. Maybe you guys know?
No, you still can't. I mean, so let's take a look at Lumen. Like Lumen came out back, I think, still when somewhere between PHP 5.5 and 5.6. So it came out on pre PHP 7, right?
Lumen. Oh, Lumen. PHP 5. Yeah, 5.5, 5.6. Okay.
Yep. So it came out, it was like pre PHP 7. So it was built to be, really fast in that environment. By the time we moved to PHP 7, Laravel was almost as fast. And there's still, Lumen's just a little faster than Laravel from the last time as I understand it last. So every Lumen API I ever built, after 7, or I needed like some feature, I needed to fire an event, I needed to like send an email for whatever reason, like almost everything I built in Lumen migrated to Laravel at some point. And I think, I know I was talking to JMac earlier today or a couple days ago, I think, about how Lumen is probably going to like disappear soon. As fast as Laravel's getting, the advantage isn't quite I don't think the advantage is really there anymore. And I think there could be a couple tweaks made in Laravel to kind of, make it a little faster, specifically around APIs, and it'll just, become obsolete.
Yeah, I agree. I was actually surprised to see the last time the update came for Lumen. I'm like, wow, they're carrying that along, are they? Yeah, I'm kind of the same way. It's like I've never built an API that was getting utilized so much that I felt like I needed that extra speed that Lumen offered before PHP 7. And just like Sean said, I've grown so accustomed to certain things being accessible to me in Laravel and how I would access them, that moving over to Lumen would trip me up just enough where it was just like, okay, why am I doing that? I'm doing this to save myself a couple of milliseconds. I don't need those milliseconds. My application's not that popular. So I always ended up falling back to Laravel. I think I did like 2 applications in Lumen and then ended up just saying, this isn't worth it.
Yeah, I've got one project in mind to potentially use Lumen for. Is I want to build an API gateway. So something that kind of like sits in front of the API, can act kind of as a caching layer, handle authentication, and then behind it I could have several other APIs, and it kind of like can be like the cohesive link between like 3 different Laravel apps that are all like micro to medium service APIs. So it can kind of like handle balancing between those. But then all of those applications do is handle authorization. So the authentication's all handled like in this thing that sits in front, kind of as a proxy. But I don't know if I need to use Lumen.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, I always had like this. I always felt like a good niche for Lumen was like the AWS Lambda service. Yeah, they don't support PHP out of the box, and it's funny. I just noticed this week I came across a couple of PHP frameworks that are designed to run on the Lambda service, but I always kind of had this hope that Lumen would be kind of the officially backed AWS PHP Lambda service that they offered, because I thought that's like a perfect fit. It's like, yeah, these little PHP apps that are running on the Lumen framework deployed to a Lambda environment. I don't know if either one of you guys have any experience with that AWS Lambda. Nope. It's basically like a serverless environment. There's no there's no servers or anything for you to manage. You just deploy it. It fires it up whenever a call is made to the endpoint. I mean, you've got to tie it together with a couple other services, but basically what happens is it fires when your endpoint's hit. It runs whatever it needs to run, and then it goes away. It's pretty cool.
I haven't had it before yet, but it's on my radar.
It sounds like
I always thought Lumen was a perfect fit for that.
What you described there sounds kind of like what Heroku is it not?
Well, Heroku is still like a whole server, right? I mean, so your application will go dormant if it's not getting utilized after a while. But it's very similar to Heroku, with the exception of this is just like, my understanding of the way it works is that it's dead until somebody tries to hit the endpoint, then it fires up, it responds to the request, and then it goes away again. It's very
pretty cool. I'm going to put it on my radar now.
Yeah, check it out. And like I said, I just came across a link on Reddit called Lambda. I think it was called Lambda PHP is what it's called. And it's a PHP framework designed to run on this service.
Yeah, I think you could probably do some, I could maybe see myself, tucking, maybe an RPC call or two behind an API that just fires Lambda functions. Like, that could be a thing.
So I got to ask you guys, the important question, when are we going to start the trashing? I came here to trash.
What do you want to trash?
Yeah, trash away, dude.
All right, you want us to open up your GitHub page? We'll start trashing you, man.
Let's do it. Come on.
Please don't. Please
bring the heat. Bring the heat, man.
No, I had like a list in my mind of all the APIs that I had worked on in the past not worked on. Let's clarify that here. Had to use in the past. I thought we'd talk about like some of the mistakes that these companies and developers did when they were making their APIs. Not so much to like call them out by name.
5 minutes of the show, man. Where were you?
Yeah, he was thinking about all these APIs he hates. All right, so let's hear it.
What are your examples? Yeah, let's hear it. Yeah, we've kind of expressed the ones we liked, and actually we didn't call anybody out we disliked by name, just to kind of a general group of APIs that we see a common thread of legacy with. But I'm curious if your opinion is going to line up with our opinion. So let's hear it.
You know who his APIs I don't like? Sean's APIs.
Any Canadian API. All these Canadian APIs in with A.
Yeah, their header, it doesn't work unless your request header has like an "eh" tag in there. It doesn't work. No, I didn't want to trash anybody by name, but just some examples of stuff that I've worked on in the past that just made me like want to pull out my hair, my head explode, and just like, what were you guys thinking?
Okay, so I'll give you the same question I gave TJ at the beginning of the show. What's the one thing that I'll word it a little differently. When you're consuming an API, what's the one thing that triggers you?
Oh, my trigger point. I think, excuse me, when exceptions are being thrown. Let's say, API, you send it a payload and you validate an ID or something. Now that API throws an exception. What do you guys expect to receive back? I'm going to start throwing things here.
What a validation error?
Sorry?
What a validation error?
Yeah, like if your API failed, what do you expect to have come? Yeah, validation. Yeah, let's go with that.
I mean, I guess if something goes wrong, I expect a closely correlated status code other than 200 and some sort of error message. Not like a stack trace, but just like a message in, you know, in the response. But definitely not a stack trace and not a 200.
Okay, thank you. I've received one where I receive a 200 request. So I wrote a guzzle command to make the API call. Everything looked good. Came back at the 200, but it was giving me incorrect data, and my code was like complaining.
You just like I just got this wave of hostility come to my head. I had that exact same issue, and I totally blocked it from my memory. It's like, yeah, you know what? Sending me a 200 code when there's an error in the response pisses me off.
It does. Oh my God.
It's really bad.
So I got this 200 response, and then I had to spend a whole bunch of time debugging it. And what I got back was two things: an error code and an error message. The message was error. The code was 5720001. Like, what the hell is this code? Oh, it's an internal error code for our internal record. Well, how am I supposed to know what this is? What am I sending you? Like, what the validation? Oh, well, let me get back to you, and I'll look it up in I'll ask one of our internal engineers. And when I'm talking to support, let me go ask one of the engineers what this code is. And a day later, they give me the response. And then here's your error. Like, come on, guys.
Like, how many error messages do you have that your codes need to be in like the thousands? I mean, that's like too many error messages.
I don't know. Now, I mean, I know I know I was late. I know that we agreed to talk about this topic. Now I'm really regretting it because now I'm filled with rage.
Man, well, I want to hear more of this rage, but I also just tweeted out a poster by Steve Shoger that is all of the HTTP status codes and what they mean. Go print it out. Perfect. Put it by your desk. Don't use 200 for anything but success.
Yeah. I think that's the one. That's my biggest and probably the biggest mistake new developers make to APIs is, hey, I want to let them know that and I understand the mindset. It's like, no, I'm telling you, you made a successful call to my API. Now I'm explaining to you that there was a problem with the call. I understand that mindset, but again, from a coding perspective, no, don't. It just make life easy for me. Make it so that if it's not a 200, I know there's a problem that I need to handle on my side.
Okay. Do you want to hear number 2 on my rage list?
Let's hear it.
Yeah.
It is when you are updating a record in an entity, a model, or whatever, but you're using a GET request.
Ooh, the dreaded post to a GET.
Yeah. Well, and you know what? I'm gonna put myself out there. Since we're going down this road, I am guilty of not taking advantage of like patch. Like I'll use post for everything. I don't use the patch convention.
See, that one I'm borderline. I those ones are forgivable to me. But what's not forgivable is that GET request. You're making me update, I don't know, this model, this entity, and you're passing in the table field in a GET request as part of the URL request. I can see that.
Yes.
Oh my God.
So I will forgive updating on a post. I can get around that. But like my recommendation is post for creates, put or patch, support one. Supporting both can be kind of a pain sometimes, but support one or the other for updates. I guess I can forgive a post for an update though.
We're still friends. You forgive me? Yeah,
Yeah, man,
I'm guilty of that. I need and I made a note the last time I did an API. I think it was actually at LaraCon, and somebody was talking about APIs. I'm like, man, the next time I do an API, I've got to get in the discipline of using. I seem to gravitate to patch because patch makes more sense for an update because it's kind of like you're patching a record, you're updating a record, and put doesn't really do that for me. All right, so I'm going to ask a question that's a little off topic. Somebody in the chat asked on the YouTube chat asked the question is how do we stay motivated to code every day? Do you guys have either one of you guys suffered from burnout? Is it ever an effort for you to get in the mood to develop? Let me hear where you guys are with this.
See, what works for me is what you have to do. You get these scented candles, you run a bath, you turn off the lights.
Well, slow down.
Wait, sorry, guys, wrong podcast. Sorry.
Wait, you pair with Eric too?
Only on Fridays. Actually, no,
pair sessions.
For the record, don't ever take your laptop near a tub. I won't make that mistake 3 times.
Oh, man.
Okay, all right, getting back on track. In terms of burnout, this has happened to me, and it sucks so much. And the big thing for me, and I'm going through it with a buddy of mine. He's burnt out, and we're working together on a project, and it's like, how can I help him? But the biggest thing is if you're going through burnout, you have to figure out how to communicate that you're going through this. You can't just shut the door and walk away from it. People, if you have people around you, they're there to help you. If you're by yourself and it's just you and the client, I mean, what do? You have to tell the client your health is not worth, the stress. I think communication is just the biggest thing, and if you do that, you'll be able to step out of the burnout phase quicker because you're not stressed that, oh my God, I have to go and tell Eric that I can't work on this today because I just can't do it. I can't focus.
Right. I think, and the first thing you've got to acknowledge is, or you should recognize, it's a thing, right? Everybody's going to go through it. You're not doing this by yourself. You're not the only one that's struggled with burnout. The developer sitting next to you, your friends, your colleagues, they all have gone through it in some form or fashion. I know for me, especially early on in development, actually, if you really want to go way back, I totally burned out from development. When I was first coding, the web wasn't what it is today, and I was learning COBOL. I was in college. I was doing COBOL. We were doing these compiles that got submitted to a mainframe, and you'd work on something for an hour. You'd compile it, send it to the mainframe. You'd go get the printout just to see that there was an error. And I'm like, this life sucks. I don't want to do this anymore. And I completely burnt out on coding while I was going for my computer science degree in college. And I dropped out of college. I said, that's it. Not working with computers ever again. Don't ever want to touch another computer. And it wasn't until the web really started to pick up and developing for the web just rekindled my interest in that whole problem solving, developing, creating something, to see it, the response happen immediately as you're doing the development was just completely life-changing for me. So I understand burnout, but even early on in my PHP life, there's the grind where you're creating form after form, and it's like this sucks. Or you're working in a legacy code base, and it's like this sucks. I don't want to do this anymore. This I feel yucky. I don't like doing this. I know for me personally, it definitely helps having friends you can reach out to. And to Sean's point, knowing that you can reach out to those friends and not be judged and get help is always good. But also, the thing that helps me a lot, honestly, is I'll fire up like LaraCast, and I'll go to something in LaraCast and go to something like I might not have worked on or something that's interested me. I'll watch Jeffrey Way do a few tutorials on it and say, okay, I'm going to fire up a little side project just to do this one thing, and just kind of change it up a little and start to do something, start to develop something that's fun for you. A quick win, maybe nothing that's ever permanent. Just, hey, I want to see how queues work. I'm gonna develop a quick application just to use queues or Docker or something like that. That's the thing for me is there's so much in our industry. There's just so many different things you can be doing, and so much of it is fun. But there might not be a reason for you to do it on a day-to-day basis. So take an opportunity. Take that. What's the thing Google used to do, that 20% time or whatever? Do that for yourself. Do a little side project of just something that you consider is fun. TJ?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely burn out. I try to do a really good job of balancing it. I coding's my hobby. It's my passion. It's what I do, for fun. I'll sit down and crack open the laptop and like work on something. It's, how I enjoy it. Like, that's how I enjoy downtime too. But I think you really struck something very important there. Like, I always am working on, something that's like passionate to me. And if for work, I have to do something that I'm not like super into having a ton of fun with, like, that's when I'll definitely be working on something else. I'll be working on, if I'm doing like real, like in the weeds, back end stuff, and I'm not really enjoying what I'm doing, but I have to do it for work, I'll maybe switch it up and do something more front-endy as like a side project. I'll start tinkering on something in Vue. I'll really kind of flip it and do something that's totally the opposite to keep me inspired and interested and like keep motivated to move forward. And, I'll eventually get, everything done, and I'll move on to something that's way more exciting at work, and I won't be working on anything outside of that.
You know what I wonder? I think what we've described in terms of taking on these side projects and these little other things, these fun things, I think we all have the same personality in that respect, that this is coding is our hobby, coding is our passion. We do it for work and we do it for fun. But what about the people who just do it for work? How do they get inspired if they go home and they don't want to learn something on Vue.js? They don't want to open up LaraCast. 9 to 5 is their coding time.
Well, I mean, these were the code things I do to help keep me fresh in coding, and like, I mean, I have other hobbies, and there are times that I need to like step away from a computer and go analog for a little bit. I mean, it happens, but I'm a cyclist. I'll go ride my bike. I've got my skateboards hanging up here. I'll go to the skate park. I don't think it has to be code. Just go do something you're passionate about. And if you're doing something you're passionate about, whether it be fishing, running, something athletic, something not athletic, playing table games, like, just do something you're passionate about and you'll find inspiration, and that'll kind of carry over to everything else in your life.
Yeah, you completely nailed exactly what I was going to say. Everybody has that thing that they do for inspiration. Everybody has that passion. For me, I've been fortunate. My passion has been my work, but same thing. I'll have to. I'll go on a motorcycle ride or something, because that's just kind of where I'll just start to drown out some of the noise in my life and start to focus on one or two things. But yeah, whatever that is for you, whether it's fishing, painting, sculpting, skateboarding, identify what that is. Give yourself permission to say, okay, I need to step away. I'm going to do this for a little while, because so often, I mean, even within coding, how often have we've pushed ourselves through the night trying to figure out a coding issue, eventually said, forget this. I can't fix this. I got to go get some sleep. You go to sleep, you wake up the next morning, and you're like, I know what I need to do now. You know, it's sometimes it's just that you need to step away.
Yeah, and I think I'll continue to out myself as a Canadian. My escape hobby is hockey. And go skate on the ice, and you're right, you just tune out the code because it's not about the code. It's about, you know, trying not to get hit, trying to score a goal, trying not to fall on your ass.
It's like, what's that queuing problem I have? Stop hitting me in the face.
Yeah, that's pretty much the Canadian way of getting over coding problems. You just go get.
See, I've always wanted to play hockey, but I don't know how to skate. So it's like there seems to be too many layers to hockey for me to ever think about even taking up. But the fact that it's a sport where you can get in physical fist fights and not get kicked out of the game, I'm like, I like this. This seems like a good sport to me.
Yeah, I'll admit sometimes there's moments where you can take your frustration out on, and go sit in the box for 2 minutes, 5 minutes.
That's it. But everybody knows getting on that ice what they're getting into. It's not like this. It's not a big surprise. We know why we're out here.
No, I mean, I had a brawl with one guy, and again, we're getting off topic. I'll try and bring it back, but I had a brawl with one guy. He got traded to my team a few games later, put on my line, and you think that's awkward, but no, we're like, man, remember that brawl? That was so awesome. You punched me, I punched you. Oh my God, I had a bruise for a week. It was great. We should do it again sometime, eh? But
I bet he used,
Canadians are weird.
I bet he used 200 for an error message.
I think we just made up a new insult. Yeah, he's the kind of guy that would use a 200 error message. You know he is. You just know by the way he walks.
By the way he skates. Yeah, I can tell.
Actually, another complaint. I want to get back onto the complaint. I just remembered another. What?
Yeah, please. I want to hear it.
Okay. I'm going to get back on this rage-filled Canadian overcomplicating thing. I've seen the like a single controller that every single API enters. I call it a general controller. Every single API goes in there, and then in the constructor, there's this massive switch statement that says, if you are a car model, this is your model. Do your work. And private methods in that controller, and oh my God, just it breaks single responsibility so hard. Have you ever worked on code where there's like a single controller that does all this stuff?
So I think the one talk from the last LaraCon US was Adam Wathan's talk that I took the most away from. The whole, create the idea of trying to keep your controllers just as small as possible. Basically, just creating the index, update, delete. I forget what the other one is now, but create. Just keeping them to kind of those standard endpoints. And then if you needed more controllers, that there was no cost associated to that to create the additional controllers, but keeping the methods within the controllers to these 4 or 5 core methods. That talk had one of the bigger impacts with my approach to problems. So I was probably just as guilty of creating really big controllers. Like I'm like, okay, yeah, anything that's associated with a car gets put into the car controller. I don't care if it's, I don't care what it is. Everything that's associated with the car goes into the car controller, and that just seemed to make more organizational sense to me at the time. But I've since kind of completely changed that way of thinking, and have really started to line up with that talk from Adam Wathan on the smaller controllers.
You know what? Had I known that before we met at LaraCon in New York last summer, if I had known that and I met you for the first time, I would have just smacked you across the face. I'm not talking like an American slap, a Canadian slap. And believe me, they hurt.
Oh, so it wouldn't have been that big of a deal then, right? Yeah. I've seen you guys slap.
So it's just a slap while wearing skates, right? That's the only difference.
Sadly, yes.
You're supposed to help keep this whole show in order. You're doing a terrible job at it.
Oh, it's not my night, is it? All right.
So controllers, yes, stick with rest verbs.
Rest. That's the word I was.
Yeah, stick with the rest verbs.
Yes.
Good. I started really pushing that angle at the company I work for right now, and it helps a lot because it reduces complexity and confusion. What method and what controller does this API endpoint belong to? Well, now I look at the API and like, oh, okay, well now it's straightforward. You can almost assume with 95% accuracy where you need to go. Which brings me to another thing I hate, and this is on the development side, redundancy. You have a GET request that gets stick with the car stuff. It's a GET request to get car. So you have a car controller, and your method is get car data. Well, come on. It's redundant. There's a GET request. It's a car controller. Get rid of the GET. Get rid of the car. Call it. What are you doing? And you're listing out a list of card, like you said, call those RESTful resource controller index, create, update, delete, post, or just, yeah. Anyways, that's another rant of mine.
Yeah, I mean, giving yourself those constraints of those rest verbs definitely leads to, a lack of redundancy, arguably cleaner code. I don't know. There's a lot of side effects that comes, from kind of giving those constraints and not being afraid to make more controllers. Like it's not like they're a nickel a controller or anything.
Actually, I just noticed 5 minutes remain. One more rant I want to get into. When you pass every single API, and I've seen this, when you pass every single API, the username and password, every single API request sends that to validate to get the data or do whatever it's doing. I cannot stand that.
You prefer tokens?
I prefer tokens or something like I understand JWT. You would send that data and get the token back. I just have an irrational uncomfortability about sending my password every single time.
So is it specifically the password, or do you just dislike sending two things rather than one thing?
The password. I just feel uncomfortable about sending that every single time.
I mean, I guess it all depends on what your authentication topology looks like. Are you talking about like a basic auth, or are you talking about time sensitive tokens, or
no, just like and this was probably 7 or 8 years ago, so if not more. But if I recall, an example would be a GET request, and in it, the username equals Sean, password equals whatever it is. And then I would changing the color of a car. The other parameter would be color equals blue. And that's my API request every single time.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I'm a little forgiving on that. I get what you're saying, and I definitely prefer something like a token system, mainly for a little better control for the user. I definitely would, discourage the whole passing of credentials, a username, password, whenever you can. And I guess this should go without saying, but we do have a Canadian on the show, so I should probably say it. We're talking HTTPS here. If we're talking HTTP, all this goes out the window. That's just bad on every level. But from an HTTPS perspective, you've got to authenticate somehow. You're going to have to pass some credentials some way. And when you're doing it programmatically, it's just a matter of handling that. So it gets fairly transparent once you get over that initial hump. So I get what you're saying, and it does kind of feel yucky, but you gotta authenticate somehow, and not everybody wants to put in, a token system or some like TJ said, some people just under the hood, it's just basic auth, and that's how they handle it. So I don't know. You're going to have to authenticate somehow. It's what that mechanism is. I don't know.
It's not that I'm necessarily advocating for username and password, but I mean, really, a token is your username and password all in one. So that's where I got to kind of my little snip about what do you just not like sending two things rather than one? Like that's really kind of the main difference here. I mean, if you're doing long life tokens that you copy and paste out of a UI, those are just as easy to reset and change as your password is. I don't disagree. It does feel kind of yucky as compared to like a short life token you get through like OAuth or something.
Well, even the long life tokens, if depending on what the API endpoints are doing, if somebody's token were to get compromised, that doesn't necessarily, or it shouldn't translate into that person who got that token being able to log into their account, because now they have their username and password. Sure, they can make API calls now as that user, but again, if it's a simple API system, that might not be that big of a deal. So I get that, and I'm with you, TJ. I'm not advocating it. I'm just saying I don't think it's. I'm not that big on people who end up using it. So I did have one more question. If you guys don't mind me throwing this out, I know we're running out of time here, but everybody's opinion on GraphQL and your impact, what you think the impact on kind of the API world is going to be. Do you guys have any thoughts, opinions on GraphQL?
I was actually talking with a fellow LaraChat member, also local to Vancouver. He was he wanted to do a talk at our local PHP meetup about GraphQL, and I'm waiting for that. I saw a talk by I'm forgetting the fellow's name. He advocates for mental health. We had Joe Ferguson, who worked with him on the show, and why am I forgetting this guy's name? Funkatron.
Oh, so you're talking about Funkatron?
Funkatron on Twitter.
Yeah.
I forget his name, but he did a great talk about it. There's a layer of confusion for me. It connects to a MySQL database or Postgres database or whatever. How do we prevent, how is it better? Like people talk about it, in terms of speed, in terms of like making an API call against it, but if you have a shitty database, you have a slow GraphQL API. Is that correct?
I mean, you have a shitty database, you have a slow application. I don't care if it's GraphQL or REST.
Exactly.
Like, I think GraphQL has a lot to be developed still. I think it's way too early on to, it could burn out and fizzle. There's so much missing from GraphQL. It's got this like weird vendor lock-in at this point that you're relying on several major companies that own all of the tooling on how to do this. You have to set it up in a very specific way. It's kind of fragile. You can't use, HTTP proxies. Like if you look at HTTP, there's so much tooling built around it. There's anything you can do with Graph, you can do in some way with a REST API. There's a long road to go between where HTTP and REST, like well-built REST APIs are now, and where GraphQL needs to go.
Yeah. Ed Finkler is who you were thinking of, Sean.
That's
yeah, and I mean, my understanding of GraphQL is so kind of rudimentary right now, but I'm keeping a close eye on it. Just kind of give you a little insight, Sean. I don't know if we've talked about it before, but it really kind of changes the landscape of how you interact with data that you're consuming. So instead of having all these individual endpoints, you basically have a query. You have a door that's a query language into those endpoints. We should probably think about having this maybe as a topic in another show, because I know it's a pretty big topic we can dive into. But we are running pretty long right now. I think we're probably at a pretty good spot to wrap up. How do you guys feel? Good?
I feel good.
Yeah, I'm good. I feel a little bad. I've spent all night bashing on Canadians, and here I am living in Detroit, basically less than 20 minutes from Canada. I feel a little bad.
I was going to say the bashing on Canadians part is the only reason I come here on every other Thursday at 5 p.m. PST. Okay.
Well, one more thing. San Diego PHP, I'm bringing a hockey stick and I'm smashing you across the ankles.
Bring it down here. Bring it down here. I'm looking forward to it. All you guys. I'm looking for everybody joining us.
Just do it when we go to Wave. That way I can be there for it.
That's what he's talking about. Wave PHP. September. I forget 19th. There you go. WavePHP.com. There's a newsletter you can go sign up for now. Okay, Sean, you want to take us out? Take us out, Sean. This is your show, man.
Fine. I was late. We're out. Bye. All right. What else?
Take it easy.
Okay, we'll be back.